Hey everyone, welcome to the Brain Body Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Zimmerman. Beyond the diagnosis and symptoms, there's a path to feeling better. Dive into the world of brain-body connection and learn how to optimize your health. In this week's episode, I do a deep dive into the concept of neuroplasticity. We go beyond just talking about what it is, but we talk about how it actually can help people improve their brain health, whether you suffered concussions, been diagnosed with POTS, dysautonomia, or you struggle with other symptoms, including migraines, headaches, depression, anxiety, and much more. I hope you enjoy. Neuroplasticity is a term that is being used a lot more the past few years. But what is it really? And what's the role of neuroplasticity when we look at brain health, but also beyond the world of the brain? How does it impact a lot of our body-based symptoms? That is what we are diving into. In my experience of helping people for over a decade, well, it's very clear that neuroplasticity is still widely underutilized, and it's not understood that well amongst providers and the general public in general. So we are going to look at this critical topic that is so much more than you've probably ever been led to believe. Now, if you're wondering who I am, maybe you're listening to some of my podcast, maybe you're watching this on YouTube or somewhere else. I'm Dr. Spencer Zimmerman. I'm dual licensed as a doctor of chiropractic with a diploma in chiropractic neurology, as well as a nurse practitioner who's spent thousands of hours studying neurology, immune system, and other things. And I've got my clinic located just outside of Tampa, Peak Brain and Body. But what are we covering? Well, we're going to look into what exactly is neuroplasticity, what are the clinical applications, and then therapeutic strategies. Ultimately, I want you to have a better understanding of what neuroplasticity is, why this is so pivotal in the world of health, and to maybe bring you some hope of different things that you can try again, because there are many people who I interact with in person and those who contact me through social media who are struggling, and yet neuroplasticity really hasn't even been looked at. So first, what exactly is neuroplasticity? Okay, we've got some definitions in here. It's typed up, so feel free to read it. But ultimately, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to adapt and change based upon input. That's it. Okay. So it's the ability of the brain to adapt and change. So you actually have these connections within the brain, okay, for synapses to change as a result of input. And this involves not only local neurons, but it can involve pools of neurons in different parts of the brain. So you may have a neuroplasticity response that increases connectivity in some areas. Okay. And you may even have some that not only it increases in some, but also reduces it in others. Now, it's important that whenever we look at neuroplasticity, that neuroplasticity is not always a good thing. If you think about little kids that get bribed to do things, then what happens? They expect that again and again and again, because certain pathways have been reinforced, right? Creating neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is not a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it is good when it's used well, and it can be a bad thing when it's used poorly. But once again, it's just the brain's ability to learn and change. Now, when we look at neuroplasticity, right, the brain has really taken a center stage for about the past 20 to 30 years. And there was this saying that many of you have heard: you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. And that was basically, the way of saying, oh, well, as we get older, you just aren't going to be able to learn anything new. The brain is just kind of, it's just not able to change. And really, there was a lot of thought that the brain couldn't change even into our 20s and 30s. But needless to say, this is proven to be wrong time and time again, because you have plenty of people in their 60s, 70s who are learning new things, right? There's a little bit about people that have done it. We've seen imaging that's shown us the brain's ability to have neuroplasticity, specifically like fMRIs and other things like that. But it's important to know that even whenever I started this over a decade ago, we were studying from medical neurology textbooks that were talking about neuroplasticity. But if we interacted with certain providers, neurologists being some of them, they would actually say, oh, but that's just a theoretical construct, or that's hypothetical and it's in a textbook, but it's not something that truly exists. So I need you to understand that this is still very, very new in today's world, with this being 2025, right? Mid-year 2025. This is something that still is widely brushed aside and not utilized for what it should be, okay? Despite there being research about it. So it's important to understand that research is there, but then the clinical applications are lacking. And we're going to talk about different strategies that can be used clinically. First, when we look at the developing brain, there's ultimately neurogenesis, so the development of new brain cells. Yes, there are certain parts of the brain that still generate new brain cells even as we get older. Whether or not those new cells are sufficient to make up for further injuries, honestly, that's still yet to be determined. Currently, it's looking like probably not. It's probably not that sufficient. But you have the most brain cells the second you're born, and then you lose them. Okay. Now, what happens though is you have remodeling and you have ultimately pruning of your synapses, okay, which actually allows it to become better. So this is synaptic plasticity. Okay. Synapses, basically, it's a point of connection between brain cells as they transmit information. And then you get these synapses that get grouped together, and now you have networks. Okay. So you have functional reorganization. And then also going along with this, you do have the ability to wire the brain for new connections to be made. So you get axonal sprouting, right? So an axon, and then a synapse is on the end of an axon. So think about it like, you've got a selfie stick. Your synapse is the part that holds your phone, and then your axon is how long the pole is. What can it reach? Now, there's a lot of symptoms someone may have when their brain is not as healthy as it should be. And so these would be signs of impaired neuroplasticity. You have cognitive, you have physical, and even emotional issues. So we've got memory, focus, concentration. You have fatigue, poor recovery, neck pain would be another thing. Any sensory processing disorder. And then emotionally, anxiety, depression, bipolar, sleep issues are all things that fall within that arena of impaired nervous system function, and connections can lead to it. Now, that's not saying that every single one of these, just because you have it, it means the brain's responsible for all of them, but it does mean the brain is a player, and it should be considered, especially if you've looked at many of the other things that you think would cause it and it doesn't. Don't forget about the brain, the most ignored part of the human body, in my opinion. So the question is, how would you even evaluate this? Okay. Well, you have things that can just be done in a clinic. So you've got a neurological exam where someone's looking at you walking, they're looking at motor movements, sensory testing. You also have computerized cognitive testing. You also have some written tests depending on where you're at. You have non-computerized balance and coordination assessments. You can also look even at heart rate and blood pressure is a good way to see nervous system functionality. Now, beyond that, you can use advanced testing such as functional MRIs, not routinely available, but the research does give us a lot of information about the health of the brain through that. But once again, it's not something regularly accessible. Next, electroencephalogram, EEG, or we do QEEGs, which is quantitative, which means all the information gets ran through a database and it tells you, are things out of sync? And so we're looking for much more than just epileptic activity that many people are looking for with a EEG. Next, when we look at balance, looking at it computerized versus just bedside. So always prefer computerized. Give me raw, good, hard, objective data. So that way, when we do a before and after comparisons, it works a lot better. And then eye movement testing. So video oculography or video nystagmography is absolutely essential, because once again, the days of having to follow someone's finger, honestly, that should be behind us. We have the technology to record exactly what's happening, so we don't have to leave things to chance. And this is great because many people now can see what's actually going on. So let's cover a couple different conditions or symptoms where people have issues. One is concussion. So concussions impact millions of people a year. When you look at some of the latest research, nearly 50% of people diagnosed in an emergency room setting are still struggling a year down the road. Technically, concussions are supposed to be a temporary disruption of normal brain functionality. But many people, as we talked about, will go into this persistent post-concussive state or where their symptoms just aren't going. And it's because their networks and their connections in their brain are not recovering appropriately. And they are also having maladaptive connections. So it's not what you want. And one of the biggest things with concussions, it was the belief that rest helped, whereas too much rest actually hurts. Having an appropriate physical exercise system is important. Cognitive challenges, vestibular rehab is essential. Okay. So is visual tracking. If you have vestibular issues, your likelihood of recovering goes down a lot. Okay. And it's going to take you a lot longer. So you have to make sure those are being addressed. Also, autonomic system issues. Some people end up with dysautonomia or POTS from it. And then, as we talked about, physical activity. Now, don't try to do one of these things in isolation unless you know the other things don't need to be addressed. So clinically, what I do is I'm basically evaluating and treating all of these because these are all pieces of the puzzle. Like if I was to coach a team, I'm not just going to focus on one little part of the team. I'm going to say, no, this whole team has to work together. When it works together, offense, defense, all that, that's when we get the results we want. As we mentioned, concussions can cause dysautonomia or POTS, but also you can have dysautonomia and POTS without a concussion. When we look at POTS or dysautonomia, this is a dysfunction of your autonomic nervous system. So nervous system. So altered neuroplasticity is a big player in keeping POTS going. This is manifested cardiovascular wise with changes in heart rate. Usually shouldn't have changes in blood pressure with POTS, but dysautonomia you definitely can. You may have fatigue, you may get some swelling, you may have headaches, right? And many other things. But whenever we look at neuroplasticity and the impaired responses, what do I see clinically? 75 to 80% of my patients are going to severely struggle with vestibular testing, so balance testing, but they'll also struggle with oculomotor based assessments. Not only do they struggle and they can't perform basic tasks, looking at stationary targets, tracking things appropriately, but this creates a lot of symptoms for them. But the good thing is once we've evaluated that, we can create a targeted plan. And then as we monitor, as we go through those treatments, they do better. Their orthostatic intolerance changes, their symptoms improve, and it's all through neuroplasticity. Now, we'll get to it in a little bit, but we're going to find out neuroplasticity is much more than just rehabbing the brain. Okay? It's not just that. What else do we have? Well, migraines. Migraines are one of the most enjoyable things an individual can have in their entire life. When we look at migraines, ultimately, these are neurological based issues. Yes, I understand there's lots of meds and everything thrown at them. And yes, you can have migraines due to the food you're eating, stress, problems with sleep. But ultimately, migraines are due to pools of neurons that get too close to firing threshold and they spontaneously fire too much and they burn through energy. And so you tip into it. Now, yes, the food you eat can cause inflammation and move that threshold and cause you to fire. So can the smells, right? And other things. But ultimately, in the same way that you take a weak muscle and you get someone stronger, they don't need the same amount of breaks. They recover faster. Their endurance is up. The same thing is true with the brain. If you strengthen the brain, you make it more resilient. The brain now has a greater tolerance for stimulation. It now takes more for the brain to activate. So you don't burn through as much energy. And when you do that, what we routinely see is people's migraines are improving. So this is one mechanism for migraines that, just like it is in the concussion, POTS, and dysautonomia world, neuroplasticity is a game changer for these people. Unfortunately, it's never evaluated because neurologists are great for a lot of things, but they're not evaluating neuroplasticity in general. they're sending to other people to evaluate eye movements and balance. They do your scans and everything else, which is good. But we really have to look at this is rehabilitative neurology is what neuroplasticity is. It's how do you harness it? And that's rehabilitative neurology. What about neurodegeneration? Well, the stronger your brain is, the more resilient you're going to be to a neurodegenerative disease, whether it's Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, Parkinson's, or other things like that. So doing it is going to help to improve your brain health, help with inflammation, right? So it needs to be done ideally before you get the diagnosis, but even after you have it, depending on where you're at, right? It is super important. But once again, you just don't get as much out of it the longer you go down the road. So neuroplasticity is important. Now, as we were talking about with POTS, it's, hey, guess what? Neuroplasticity is much more than just connecting the brain by doing exercises. Super important, but there's more to it. If you're finding this information valuable, please share this podcast with others and give us a 5-star review, as that is the only way this podcast grows. Please continue listening and keep enjoying. Inflammation. Inflammation is one of the most talked about things in all of non-drug medicine, right? You've got to get your inflammation down. There's a lot of people going with chronic inflammation, and this is due from a variety of factors. It's due to your sleep, your stress, your foods, and many other things. But ultimately, chronic inflammation in the brain or in the body, right, which can impact the brain, changes the immune system in your brain, driving a microglial response that is inflammatory. This is going to disrupt neurotransmitters. It's going to impair your ability to remodel, clean up your connections, so your synapses. It's also going to impact your ability to produce growth proteins in the brain that promote plasticity, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and also just create more, once again, inflammation, oxidative stress. It's this revolving thing. So part of doing this is, one, you've got to reduce inflammation, right? When we talk about nutrition, blood sugar, anything that's blood sugar and insulin related is going to play a big, big role. Any ultra processed foods need to be gone, right? We want fresh foods the best we can, minimally processed. Controlling your stress, doing things you enjoy is super important. Finding joy in life, prioritizing your sleep. There are some supplements we can do to help. We don't go into those overly specific, fish oils. Always kind of a good idea to see where your omega status is and supplement accordingly. Vitamin D, same thing. But make sure things are good. And once again, supplements go on top of your nutrition. They don't make up for your nutrition. And physical exercise also is super important. The right amount of physical exercise reduces inflammation and helps calm the immune system. Now, if you go too much, you can definitely burn things out, and that's also not good. So finding that balance. Chronic fatigue and brain fog. These are also things that we see, when we leave the conditions and we start getting the symptoms. Guess what? Your brain is the driver of chronic fatigue and brain fog for most people. If your brain cannot produce and use energy well, chronic fatigue and brain fog is expected. There's no part of the body that uses more energy than your brain. So an inefficient brain that's essentially a gas guzzler will make you feel worse. Now, having sleep issues will also do it. There's immune system issues that also mess with it. But if you use the right concepts of neuroplasticity to strengthen the brain, this now helps you produce and use energy better, helps quiet down the immune system, and ultimately chronic fatigue and brain fog for many, many people will go away. Now, does this mean that that's all you need to do? Well, no. Make sure your labs and everything look good. There's other podcasts and videos where we've went into different labs, and we'll do more in the future. But this is one piece of the puzzle, right? You've got a brain piece, and then you've got a body piece, and the body piece, gut health, thyroid, sex hormones, immune markers, and many other things like that. But when you connect the pieces, that's where the best results always come in our experience. What else? Mood, right? So depression and anxiety are big things that when you look at the research, it is due to impaired neuroplasticity. And it's something that we've seen with some of the medications. They find they actually change neuroplasticity, which is maybe why some of them work, but also why others don't work. We also know with neuroplasticity, there are certain parts of the brain that become overactive or underactive, leading to imbalances. And we also know there's a lot of inflammation in these brains that also drives impaired neuroplasticity. So once again, creating better neuroplasticity, better brain pathways through mindfulness, physical exercise. If you have findings on your eye movements and balance, that's critical. Cognitive behavioral therapy, right? All of these done over time that are repeated, just like you wouldn't expect to get strong from the gym once. But when it's done, it's repetition. Things can improve and get better. So when you're trying to find a place to do it, this is critical. One is you've got to have someone who's going to be specific. I cannot tell you how often I get people who've done generic vestibular therapy or generic vision therapy, and they just don't get the results. They often leave feeling worse. And many of the reasons they feel worse is because the intensity of the therapy was too much. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing when it comes to the brain. But also at the other end, not doing enough is also a bad thing. So you have to have providers and a treatment team that's very in tune to what you can tolerate, right? Even if they do similar treatments for different people, that's not horrible, but the way it's being executed, how much that's being done, that should be modified. Not everyone should be like, oh, you're doing this 5 times for everyone. It's like, no. What can they tolerate? How fast do they progress? And then when you're trying to progress them, it's that repetition. Are you getting enough repetition to truly make these lasting changes? And then timing, right? Let's make sure that we're doing it at the right time. Some of the biggest things I see impact timing, it's going to be lab results. There are some lab results that we'll see blood sugar, insulin, A1C, poorly controlled thyroid or hormones that maybe you want to give someone a month or so before you start trying to change the neuroplasticity with neurological rehab, because they're not set up yet for the most success. And then lastly is don't try to find the magic bullet. Don't do it. The magic bullet doesn't exist. If it did, nothing else would need to exist. What we find is when you integrate various different things, neurological rehab, plus other therapies that we'll talk about in a moment, with labs, lifestyle, that is what sets the stage for the best results. It's not about one, it's about which combination do they need. Just like if you like football, you don't have one play you run. You have a variety of plays that you're doing to help get you where you want to be. If you only run one play, you'll never get there. So when we look at some of the different tools that can be used for neuroplasticity, we have vestibular rehab. Okay, vestibular rehab is most well known for balance. Now, balance is not necessarily just, oh, I'm running and stuff. No, there's a lot of things that when you really assess balance appropriately, you'll find deficits. Like if I only evaluated people who told me they were dizzy or they had balance issues, 75-80% of the people that I find issues with, we'd never know because we'd have never checked. Visual processing, eye movements, tracking, pursuing targets, shifting your attention, moving your eyes in and out. All of this is critically important. Cognitive-based training, hand-eye coordination, reaction time, impulse training, all of these strengthened overlapping in different parts of the brain as it becomes more efficient. People do well. Now, there's some other therapies beyond this, such as transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy has a lot of research behind it to show changes in neuroplasticity. Also, neurofeedback is something that can do it too. So neurofeedback is basically you put on a cap. It's going to monitor your brain waves. If your brain waves are where they should be, you get a feedback signal, noise, or visual that shows, hey, you're where you should be. Now, the one that's not as sexy as the rest is physical exercise. Physical exercise is one of the best ways to promote neuroplasticity. There are plenty of patients I'll have them go and exercise or work out before they do any of their brain-based exercises, because you're driving blood flow to the brain. You're also, through a variety of mechanisms, causing release of growth factors that's going to help promote synaptogenesis. So please don't discount physical exercise. I know for the longest time, I was like, oh, physical exercise just to look good and it's for heart health. You cannot have a good heart without having a good brain, right? It's like what you need to do for a good heart is what you need to do for a good brain, and vice versa. So do it for that, right? Do it so you don't have to get dementia, or you at least significantly reduce the chances you get it, because that is something you can do. So when we look at lifestyle factors, once again, we've talked about, make sure you're getting your sleep. Do not sacrifice your sleep. When you sleep, you have a waste removal system known as your lymphatic system that is most active. Make sure you're getting that sleep. Maybe it's 7 hours, maybe it's 9 hours. Get what you need. Next, stress management. Control your stress. Stress is one of the most things we're like, oh, but we know everyone's got it. But then everyone goes and they minimize it. Stress is one of those things that really does make or break people. We are meant for temporary stress. And we were meant for more physical stress than emotional stress. If you think about how long humans have been on this earth, it was like, oh, I'm going to be without food. Oh, we're going to be attacked. Oh, this, right? It was physical stressors that also could be emotional. Whereas now we have an absence of physical stressors. People are more sedentary than ever. They're not doing a ton of stuff, but we have an overabundance of emotional stressors because of technology, from social media to text to emails and all of that. Next, make sure you are reducing the amount of inflammation in the food you're eating. So once again, get rid of the processed foods. Make sure you're getting good essential fatty acids, good proteins. I'm a big fan of paleo style diet. So fresh foods, fresh veggies, like, right, get rid of gluten and dairy in general. Mediterranean diet's one of the most well-researched. Now, yes, they do have some grains, but we also have to look at where are those grains coming from, right? There's a lot of things that goes beyond it. So it's not necessarily just as simple as that. And then learn new things. You've got to be challenging yourself. If you don't challenge it, that part of the brain, like let's say this part of the brain right here needs to be activated when I do something. If you don't do it, those parts of the brain, like, all right, I guess we don't need neuroplasticity here. We're going to weaken. We're going to shrivel up like a muscle would if it's not used. And it will essentially do it. But if you strengthen the brain, you keep learning new things, the brain becomes strong, it becomes resilient. And now if you do have something that happens in life, a concussion, or you get sick, or you have a stroke, you now are going to increase the likelihood you bounce back from this. But if you don't have a good support, then what happens is what's going to happen. Now, I want to talk about this briefly. So many of you know that my wife, Sarah, had concussions that stemmed back from when she was a teenager in car accidents, never treated. And it wasn't until the end, when I was, at least halfway through or more through chiropractic school, I was working at a brain injury clinic, that we realized that she had those 3 concussions. And that's why she had headaches and motion sickness, dizziness, brain fog, mood issues, sleep issues, and so much more. And before we realized it, she actually threw up in the chiropractic clinic because they overstimulated her brain. They gave her too much from a vibration plate, which most people are like, oh, I love that thing. Well, for her, it was a bad thing. So what we did, right? We ended up, once we learned, and we evaluated the health of her brain, and we found out there was a lot of stuff happening with her vestibular system that had been hurt severely. There was also a lot of oculomotor things that got hurt. With that, we found the weak parts of the brain. We retrained her vestibular system, retrained her oculomotor system. We did supportive therapies with mild hyperbaric oxygen therapy. We did hand-eye coordination, cognitive tasking. We used low-level laser therapy. We improved her nutrition. We used some supplements to help support the brain. And despite it being over 15 years worth of symptoms, she still improved. She still got a lot better. So I hope this shows you that neuroplasticity is something that, in general, I find people can still achieve it. There's very few times when they can't, and that's when they've already hit dementia. But outside of it, I don't care if your injury was 5 years or 30 years ago. I routinely see the brain can change. The brain is resilient. It wants to have positive neuroplasticity, but it can only respond to the stimuli it is given. And everything in your environment's a stimuli, from the computer to walking to sleep to the food. That's all stimuli that's going to promote plasticity in one way or the other. So you stack the deck in the favor of where it needs to go. Now, neuroplasticity, because it is still so new, maybe in the future we'll see some better things with neuroimaging to give us a better idea of how to target and see better initial responses that we can see before there's even symptom changes. I don't know when that's going to be. There's some stuff in research that looks cool, but once again, it's very cost prohibitive for anyone else. There's also more non-invasive brain stimulation techniques, which we've talked about, TMS and many other things at this point in time. Virtual reality is something that is growing in the neurological rehab space for many different things. We're also going to be getting some AI-powered assessments that's going to be layered in with the technologies for an exam to also help with treatments. And as this does, we're going to see better things, right? We're always leaving the world of generic behind. The better the technology we have to evaluate things, the more specific we can be, the more of a sniper we can be. The more of a sniper we can be, the greater the results people get faster, and the harder the cases that can actually be helped. Also, for those that want it, you can also make sure your brain is where it needs to be. So many people wait and kind of go with the head in the sand approach. Oh, I hope I don't get dementia, but I don't really have a strategy. Well, if you can know where your brain health is, you already know you're having some oculomotor deficits or some vestibular deficits, then you can strengthen them to help change what you could be. And then these are things that can be integrated with regular medical treatments. And then also another big thing is going to be remote monitoring. It's going to be pretty interesting because right now a lot of things they really need to be done in the office. But when we have a way to assess people at about the same level at home as we do in the office, that's going to be a game changer. I don't know how that's going to fully equate yet to treatments, but as far from an evaluation and tweaking some stuff, even just for home therapies, I'm really excited for what that's going to bring in the future. So takeaways, neuroplasticity is pretty universal. There's very few people who cannot achieve it, but most people can. I don't care if it's a stroke, if it's a traumatic brain injury, neurodevelopmental, you've had it for 30 years, I routinely see it. Assessments mean everything. Evaluate the brain functionality. Use that to get a tailored treatment plan and be specific. The more specific you are, the better the results you get. If not, you become one of the many that did a generic treatment that then says, oh, I did vestibular therapy and I didn't get better. And it's because it was executed generically, not specifically. Consistency is key. Also, don't think you can show up somewhere once or twice and get magic results. It does take time and consistency for it to work. And you also have to make sure the other things that can impact neuroplasticity, so this is part of the holistic approach, is being taken care of. Don't try to fix someone's brain who can't sleep, has zero hormones, has blood sugar issues like crazy. No, these need to be talked about. These need to be addressed. If not, then people aren't going to get the results they would like to. So I hope this provided a ton of insight into neuroplasticity, what it is, what it can be used for, what are some of the different tools out there to help with neuroplasticity. And I can't wait to see how this stuff keeps changing in the future, because neuroplasticity has been a game changer for me and my patients after doing this over a decade. There are people who never thought they could get better, and they get better in a month. There are people who've struggled forever, and they're like, wow, I didn't think I could still change and improve. And there are things that we didn't expect to improve that did improve. And we're still kind of at the beginning of understanding neuroplasticity, but we know enough. I've seen enough where I can very confidently say neuroplasticity, in the entire time I've been doing this, and it's still true today, it is the most ignored aspect of health. Period. People are looking for infections in the whole natural health community. They're looking at hormones. They're looking at gut health. They're looking at stress response. They're looking at sleep. But still in general, the majority of people are not looking at neurological function beyond a MRI or CT scan, which is not function. That is tumors, bleeds, fractures, and other things in that arena. So please do not discount the importance of neuroplasticity. Okay. It is much more profound than you realize. Right now, the concepts people have of it is basically the equivalent of an old dial-up phone, when in reality, it is the cell phone you have in front of you that can do a million things beyond that. You're like, if someone would have told you back then what it could do, you're like, you're nuts, man. We'll never have a device that could do that. Well, that's what the brain is whenever it's harnessed appropriately with neuroplasticity. And like always, if you'd like to work with me, you can give my office a call or visit the website, peakbrainandbody.com, phone number 813-838-4005. And if you have other topics you want me to cover in the future, if I get enough comments asking for the same thing, I will gladly do either in-depth or short videos on that. Until next time, I'm Dr. Z. If you have found the material valuable, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. Spencer Zimmerman, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or where you normally listen to podcasts from. If you would like to work with me, visit peakbrainandbody.com to learn more. You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, all with the handle Dr. Spencer Zimmerman. I'm also on X with the handle Dr. S. Zimmerman 5. This podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other healthcare professional services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials are to be used at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not meant to be a substitution for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition that they have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.